In April of 1932, a Southern Pacific freight ground into the yards at El Paso, Texas, and before the wheels had fully stopped, 44 men and boys dropped off it and scattered into the afternoon sun. A University of Chicago observer wrote it down 3 years later in a pamphlet called Youth in the Depression, and what struck him was not the number but the ages. Some of these travelers were children. One of them, 10 years old, could already feed himself from a discarded can, ride a moving train, mend his own coat, and read a stranger's fence for word of a meal. That night he would eat from a shared pot the men called the mulligan, and he knew, without being told, exactly what he owed it. Today, a boy of 10 cannot be left alone with a pot of boiling water. Something was not taught then that is not taught now, and not in any school. It was taught in the tramp camps in the jungles at the edge of town by men who had nothing to give but what they knew. An estimated 250,000 teenagers rode the rails between 1929 and 1941, the road kids, part of nearly 4 million Americans shaken loose from home. The youngest learned fastest because they had to. There are 25 of these skills. One of them killed more boys than the railroad police and the winter cold combined, and it was not catching the train. It was letting go of it. And the last skill, number 1, is the exact thing an economist would win a Nobel Prize for describing. We start at 25. Number 25, reading the chalk marks. Every boy learned to slow his walk past a fence post and look for the marks left in chalk or coal by the ones who came before. A cross meant a handout, a certain scratch, a kind woman inside, another a man with a gun. Old-timers swore by the code, though the truth is thinner than the legend, and the historic Graffiti Society, after logging more than 1,000 real hobo markings, has never found a single verified one. What is certain is that boys learned to read a street before they walked it. Then the mark washed off in the next rain. Before we go on, hit subscribe, because what is coming up could have saved a family in that decade, and one of these skills still could. Now, the right way to knock. Number 24, the back door. A boy never approached from the street. You came up the alley, quiet, hat in hand, and knocked at the back door near the kitchen, where the woman of the house would be. You asked for work first and food second, always in that order, because the asking mattered as much as the answer. A plate on the step was a knee shaker, a plate at the table a sit down. Knock wrong and you got the door, knock right and you got fed, and a bowl you still had to carry yourself. Number 23, turning a can into a kitchen. Your grandfather could walk the ditch beside any rail yard and come back with his whole cook set. A large tin can was the pot, a smaller oyster tin the coffee tank. A newspaper account from 1900 already described 5 or 6 men pooling a fire and a can, one hauling wood, one meat, one potatoes. A boy guarded his can like money because a man without one ate cold or ate nothing. Nobody now would think to look in the ditch. But a pot is only as good as the water in it, and the water could kill you. Number 22, washing in the creek. Every road kid learned to strip at the water's edge, scrub his one shirt and his socks with a nub of soap, and drape them over low branches while he shivered. Cleanliness was not vanity. A boy who let the dirt win got sores, then fever, then he could not walk, and a boy who could not walk was finished. Machines do the same work in an hour now, but that same creek, the one that cleaned him, could just as easily poison him. Number 21, finding water you could trust. This was where a careless boy died quietly weeks later, far from anyone who knew him. The camps were foul at the edges, trash heaps that drew rats, ponds that carried whatever washed into them. So a boy learned to draw from a running creek above the camp rather than a still pond below it, and when unsure, to boil it hard before it touched his lips. Get it wrong, and the sickness took days to arrive and left no one to blame. The tap indoors ended all of that, but the fire that made water safe had to be built without calling the one man every boy feared. From here, the housekeeping ends. Everything up to now kept a boy comfortable. Everything after this kept him breathing, and it starts, as almost everything on the road started, with the train. Number 20. Banking a low fire. A jungle fire sat in a pit at the center of camp, and the skill was making it small. A boy fed it dry wood that gave heat without smoke, because a tall plume told the railroad police exactly where the camp was, and they did not come to warm their hands. Too big and you lost the camp, too small and the stew never boiled. Every scout learns a version of it now for a badge. A boy then learned it because the alternative was going hungry, or worse. But the fire waited in camp, and reaching camp meant riding. Number 19, rolling the bindle. Your whole life went into a single blanket. A boy laid out his spare shirt, his can, his soap, a heel of bread, rolled the blanket tight, tied it, and slung it on a stick. That bundle was a bindle, and the skill was in the packing, light enough to run with, tight enough that nothing spilled when he swung onto a moving car. A sloppy bindle snagged, and a snag at the wrong moment put you under the wheels. Travelers buy engineered frames for the same job today. A boy did it with a horse blanket and twine, and a packed bindle meant he was ready to choose his car. Number 18, picking your car. Not every car would carry a boy safely. He learned to want an empty boxcar, and the first thing he did on climbing in was wedge something into the door track, a spike, a block of wood, so the heavy door could not roll shut, and latch him inside a steel box no one would open for days. A gondola heaped with sand did in a pinch, soft to lie on, open to the sky. The wrong car meant heat or thirst or a locked tomb. Freight cars are sealed and censored now. Then it was just a boy and a doorway and his own good sense, and that sense had to start back in the yard. Number 17, reading the yard and slipping the bull. Every yard had a bull, the railroad's own police, and some were decent, and some would beat a boy bloody for sport. A road kid learned which yards to avoid, and in the rest he waited in the trackside brush and watched, learning the bull's rounds, the blind spots, the moment the man turned his back. He boarded where the line slowed, at a bend outside of town, never in the guarded heart of the yard. Caught, he lost days to a cell, or worse. The bulls are still out there, and the watching is total now, but patience meant nothing if he chose the wrong train. Number 16, knowing your train. A boy learned the difference between a slow local that stopped at every siding and a through freight that would not touch its brakes for 100 miles. And he learned to catch the local or the fast one only where it had to slow. The men had names for the quick ones, the hot shots, the red balls, and a boy learned that a passenger flyer was never the answer. Too fast, too watched, too deadly. Pick wrong, and you were carried helpless past your stop or jumped at a speed that killed. Choose the train, though, and you still had to catch it, and it would already be moving. Number 15, catching out on the fly. This was the moment the whole life turned on. A boy let the first several cars pass because those carried the crew, then ran alongside the train, matched its pace as best his legs allowed, reached up for the iron ladder rung, and pulled his whole weight up in one motion. At 5 or 7 miles an hour, leaving a bend, it was possible. A half step slow and his arm took the full jerk of a train that did not care. missed the rung, and he fell under it. Nobody living does this on purpose anymore, but getting on, hard as it was survivable. Getting off was the part that took them. Here it is, the one I promised you at the very start. Not the bulls, not the cold, not hunger, the single skill that killed more boys than any of those, and it was the mirror image of the last one. Number 14, getting off alive. Everyone thinks the danger is climbing on. The killing was in the dismount. A boy learned to throw his bindle clear first, so his hands were free, then lower himself to the bottom rung, let his feet skim the gravel to feel the speed, and at the right instant, let go and run, matching the train's pace, then curl away from the wheels. Let go running slower than the train, and he stumbled, and the stumble pulled him under the following cars, and the steel finished it in a breath. In 1933, the Warner Brothers put a film about it in the theaters, Wild Boys of the Road, meant to frighten children off the rails, and it thrilled them onto the rails instead. Survive the train, and the jungle still had to feed you. Number 13, running the mulligan. Now the pot again, in full. The mulligan was the communal stew at the heart of every jungle, and the man who built it was the mulligan mixer. A boy learned the whole craft, rustle the can, build the low fire, and honor the one iron rule that you added before you took. One hauled meat, one potatoes, one an onion, and into the can it went to boil slow for hours, because the meat was tough and only time made it tender. A single pot fed anywhere from 10 to 50 men and boys at a sitting. A boy who tried to eat without adding was remembered, and being remembered wrong on the road was dangerous. Number 12, snaring the meat. A boy learned to set a wire snare on a rabbit run at dusk, to lay a hook and line in a creek overnight, to know which fields held what. Whatever he caught went into the pot, not his own mouth alone, because a boy who brought meat to the mulligan ate well every night after, welcomed at any fire. A clumsy snare meant an empty pot and a hungry camp looking at you. Sportsmen do it for pleasure now with catalogs of gear. A boy did it with salvaged wire and a great deal of hunger, and when the snare came up empty, he gleaned. Number 11, gleaning the field. There was a code to taking food from the land. You gleaned what the harvest left. The potatoes turned up and missed. The apples on the low branches after the pickers passed. You begged and you traded your labor, but you did not steal from the farmer who might feed you tomorrow, because a boy who stole from a town found that town closed against every boy after him. The forager's ethic was survival dressed as manners. We call it foraging now and make a hobby of it. Then gleaning fed a single day, while the harvest itself could feed a whole season. Number 10, following the crops. The boys who lasted learned the map of the harvest and rode it like a clock. Strawberries first, then apples, hoeing hops through the summer, potatoes in the fall, and if he made it that far west, shaking walnuts at the end. One boy who left home at 16 remembered running that whole circuit, 6 or 7 months of it, and coming out with just enough money to carry his family through the winter. A boy who did not know the sequence arrived after the work was gone and starved. Machines and a few hired crews do all of it today. Then it took an army of children who knew the calendar by heart. Number 9, earning the plate. When there was no harvest, a boy sold the only thing he had, his back. He swung a sledge and a pick on road gangs, split firewood for a farm wife, weeded a garden row by row for a single sit-down meal. At the El Paso airport, they hired a fresh batch of transients every 10 days and worked them by hand, sledge and pick, nothing else. The oldest name for the whole tribe was Hoe Boy, the boy with the hoe come to work the fields. A boy too proud or too soft to labor did not eat. and all of it destroyed the one thing he could not replace: his boots. From here, it stops being about the road and starts being about the boy himself, what it did to his body and what he did to stay whole. Number 8. Keeping your boots alive. On the road, a man's boots were his life, and a boy learned to nurse a failing pair long past the point anyone today would throw them out. He cut cardboard to line a sole worn through, greased the leather with any fat he could find, stitched a split seam with salvaged thread. There is a letter from those years, plain as a gravestone, saying it was a time when a man could be killed for the shoes he wore, whatever shape they were in. Bad boots meant blisters, blisters meant infection, and infection on the road meant the end. New shoes are cheap and thrown out half-worn now. Then a boy kept one pair breathing for a year. Number 7. Patching to last. A boy on the road owned one shirt and one coat, and he kept them alive with a needle. He mended a tear before it became a hole, patched an elbow with cloth cut from a ruined shirt, re-sewed a button with thread pulled from a hem. He washed the clothes in the stream and mended them dry, because clothing that failed in November could kill him by January. A torn coat let the wind in, and the wind on an open flat car at night was a killer all its own. Clothes are tossed half-used today. Then a boy made one coat outlast 3 winters. Number 6. Whittling. Give a road kid a pocket knife and a scrap of soft wood, and he could make himself useful and make himself calm. He carved a spoon for the mulligan, a small toy to trade, a handle for a broken tool. The most patient carved coins. A buffalo nickel, worked with a sharp blade and steady hours, could be recut into a new face entirely, and these hobo nickels traveled the rails as small handmade treasures, so prized that collectors still hunt them, and a whole society keeps their record. A boy with a knife and skill was never quite penniless and never quite bored, and the same hands that carved had, sooner or later, to heal. Number 5. Doctoring yourself. There was no one else to do it. A boy learned to lance a blister clean and bind it, to wash a gash in boiled water and wrap it, to sweat out a fever alone in a boxcar corner and hope. He had to, because towns up and down the line refused to treat transients at all, afraid a little mercy would draw 100 more sick strangers to their doors. So the knowledge passed boy to boy at the fire. Rough medicine for a body no doctor would touch. Get it wrong, and a small wound turned to blood poisoning, and there was no coming back. An urgent care sits on every corner now. Then a boy was his own physician. Number 4. Taking a road name and leaving your mark. Somewhere in his first months, a boy stopped being the name his mother gave him and became a road name, a moniker. And he learned to leave that name behind him, chalked on a water tower or a bridge, with the date and the direction he was traveling. Researchers have found thousands of these, real ones, one reading simply that a man called Ace passed westbound in 1927. It was not vanity, it was proof. In a country that had lost him, a boy wrote his name on a wall to say he had existed and to tell the next traveler he had come through. Alive, a phone tracks every step now and forgets none of it. Then a boy's whole record was one word in chalk. Everything so far was a skill. A boy could practice until his hands knew it. The last 3 were not skills he had. They were things he became. And the final one, the modern world, is only now painfully trying to relearn. Number 3. Telling it true at the fire. After the pot was scraped and the coals banked, the men and boys sat and talked, and the talk was the most valuable thing in camp. Which towns fed you and which jailed you, which yards the cruel bulls worked, which trains ran safe and which had killed a man last week. A boy learned to listen, to remember, and above all, to tell it straight, because a lie at the fire could send the next boy into a beating or under a wheel. This was the whole information network of the road, carried in nothing but honest voices. A machine holds all of it now, and half of it is false. And the fire's deepest lesson was not the news. It was the giving. Number 2, giving when you had nothing. This is the one that undoes everything you think you know about those men. A boy learned that the pot fed whoever showed up, contributor or not, because turning away a starving stranger was simply not done. There is an account from that decade of a young girl in a jungle on Christmas Day, cold and with nothing, and one of the ragged men there gave her his own pocket knife, the whole of what he owned, to give. She wept, telling it, 60 years on. The mulligan was never really about the stew. It was a lesson in the shape of a meal that a man with almost nothing still owed something to the man beside him, and that giving was not kindness, it was law, and the law had a name. Number 1, the law of the jungle, not the cruelty that phrase has come to mean. The opposite of it. A boy learned above every other skill the unwritten code that governed the camp, and it was this. You left the jungle cleaner than you found it. You stacked dry wood for the next man before you moved on. You added to the pot before you ate from it. You contributed or you moved along, and no one had to say it twice. Camps even kept rough committees to see the cons were cleaned and the sick not robbed. It was the master skill because it held all the others together, the pot and the marks and the honest talk and the giving. Here is the strange part. For most of the last century, learned men insisted a shared thing, with no owner was doomed, that people would always take and never tend it. Then an economist named Elinor Ostrom spent her life proving otherwise, showing that ordinary people, left alone, will write their own rules and govern a common thing wisely for generations. In 2009, she won the Nobel Prize in Economics for it, the first woman ever to do so. And Elinor Ostrom had been a child in Los Angeles during that same depression. The thing she won the highest prize in the world for describing, a ragged 10-year-old already knew by heart and lived by every night over a can of stew the men called the mulligan. So here is what I will ask of you, not to ride a train. Pick one, just one of these, and do it this week. Mend the coat instead of tossing it. Carry water to someone who has none. Leave the campsite or the break room or the street you walk cleaner than you found it, and stack a little wood for whoever comes next. That is the whole of it, and it costs nothing, which was always the point. And tell me, down in the comments, because nearly every American family has this story somewhere, did your people ride the rails in those years, or did your grandmother feed a stranger at the back door, and what did they carry away from it? I read them all. Next time we trade the iron rail for the sewing needle. 30 embroidery stitches a girl had mastered by the age of 12. Stitches that dressed a whole family and told whole stories in thread, and that almost no one alive can finish today. They vanished even faster than the tramp camps did, and I will show you why. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Because in the end, the mulligan was never a stew. It was a country's whole idea of itself, boiled down into a single shared can and passed, still warm, to a boy who had nothing and who somehow still knew he owed something back.